Hello, welcome to this audio lecture on Jorge Diaz Cintas' essay, Audiovisual Translation, an overview of its potential. The audiovisual media is all around us, everywhere. We are literally swamped by audiovisual media, TV, cinema, radio, and the net. Although audiovisual translation began in the early days of the cinema, first in the form of subtitles and then in the form of dubbing, there has been very little theorization on the subject. Jorge Diaz Cintas' book, New Trends in Audiovisual Translation, published in 2009, is a collection of essays on subtitling and dubbing of audiovisual texts which provide valuable insights into the theoretical foundations of the discipline as well as into the process of subtitling and dubbing. Some of these essays also analyze the products of subtitling and dubbing, focusing on issues like cultural barriers, transfer of culture, and issues of gender and dialectical and stylistic variety involved in the process of translation. The introductory essay by Cintas titled Audiovisual Translation, an overview of its potential, discusses the scope of audiovisual translation in the contemporary world. The author notes that though audiovisual translation can be traced back to the very origin of cinema, research in the field began sluggishly in the late 50s of the 20th century and picked up momentum only at the close of the 20th century. However, the digital revolution that has happened in the last 2 decades has made audiovisual translation a prolific activity and a discipline for determined and prominent academic research. The author first takes a brief look at the history of studies in the discipline. Many of the early works were scattered essays which were not collected. The first study in book form was in French, written by S. Lax, published in 1957. A number of minor articles on subtitling, focusing on the audio-visual translator, the differences between subtitling and dubbing, and the different stages in the translation process appeared in the next 2 decades. One of the issues discussed was the challenges posed by subtitling in 4 categories: technological, psychological, aesthetic, and linguistic. There were also suggestions on the orthography or form of writing and the constraints imposed on the translator by the medium. C. Tilford introduced the concept of constrained translation, relating to a translator working under various constraints imposed by the medium. In 1987, the first ever conference on dubbing and subtitling was held in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. The conference led to the publication of several books in the discipline, one of the most important ones being Johan Inverson's Subtitling for the Media. The book provides exhaustive information on the process of subtitling, a detailed history of the technical aspects of subtitling, and an early overview of subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing. The cultural turn in translation studies in the 90s of the 20th century saw the emergence of Kirk Delabastida as a perceptive scholar in audiovisual translation. Delabastida discussed not only the semiotics of subtitling in cinema, but also its cultural implications. The process of subtitling was discussed in detail in consonance with the developments that were taking place in translation studies in general during the period. The works of Jose Lambert, a prominent translation study scholar, were also published at the same time. Lambert tried to highlight the ways in which audiovisual productions, including the translations, were manipulated ideologically. Jorge Diaz Cintas regards the 1990s as the golden age of audiovisual translation, in which several collected volumes and works of prolific authors in the field like Gottlieb and Gambier appeared. This was the decade when audiovisual translation really came of age. Several universities in many European countries started offering courses on various areas of audiovisual translation, including dubbing, subtitling, voiceover, and subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, and audio descriptions for the blind and the partially sighted. From being considered a minor area in translation studies, audiovisual translation has today grown into a full-fledged, bustling discipline. Cintas points out that unlike in literary translation, a good command of the source and target languages may not be adequate resource for the audio visual translator. The medium imposes a number of constraints. An audiovisual translator who tries to recreate a situation on the screen, a situation in the target culture on the screen, may be hampered by a number of problems. Some of these problems are well known. The dialogue between the characters can sometimes be too fast paced for subtitling to catch up with them. The variety of dialect or sociolect may not have an equivalent in the target language, or it may be difficult to produce a translation that syncs with the lip movements of the characters on the screen. The two main processes of AVT or audiovisual translation are dubbing and subtitling. In the first process, the oral output of the original soundtrack is replaced by a soundtrack in the target language. This is a popular form of audiovisual translation. This replacement can be full or partial. When it is full, it's called dubbing or live sync. Audiences in Kerala would be familiar with a number of films from languages like Telugu dubbed into Malayalam and very successful in the market. Two such films are Idu Njangalude Logam and Happy Days. Both were enormous successes at the box office. In partial dubbing or revoicing, which is called voiceover, the original soundtrack can often be heard in the background and may reappear occasionally in place of the new soundtrack. Dubbing involves the replacement of the actors' dialogues by dialogues in the target language. The synchronization of the lip movements with the new dialogues can make the viewers believe that the actors are actually speaking the target language. Subtitling involves the presentation of a written text, usually on the bottom of the text, on the frame. This written text represents not only the dialogues of the characters, because we also have sometimes other linguistic elements like letters, signboards, banners, graphata, etc., which form part of the original visual image. Although Cintas does not discuss it in his essay, one can also think of giving subtitles for geographical features, landmarks, or monuments which are not likely to be familiar to the target audience. Voiceover or partial dubbing, in which the original soundtrack is not removed but kept at a minimum auditory level, is also quite popular. The translation in the form of the new soundtrack is superimposed on it. The original soundtrack continues to be heard faintly under the new soundtrack. A common practice in voiceover is to begin with the original soundtrack, suppress it in favor of the new soundtrack, and again to bring it to the surface at the end. Unlike in normal dubbing, the illusion that the characters are speaking the target language is destroyed. Cintas goes on to discuss the question of the autonomy of